Okay, Valentine's Day is coming up. Have you made a card yet? Even if it's super last minute, this tutorial is gonna be for you because this is super easy. Hey, I'm Becca with the Happy Ever Crafter, and in this video, I'm gonna show you how to make a watercolor looking Valentine's Day card. Super easy, with absolutely no watercolor skills and absolutely no watercolor. This should only take you a few minutes to make a card that looks like you put a ton of effort in, so let's jump right in. Okay, so for this tutorial, we actually have quite a few tools, and hopefully you have them all sitting around at home, but there might be a few that you need to go grab if you want to make this tutorial, or you can edit it to make it work with the stuff that you do have. So the first thing that might be uncommon is this masking fluid. So masking fluid comes in little bottles like this with a squeeze top, and it's got this little pin on it that I can use to write or to draw. So that's why I like this one, but you can also buy it in little jars that you can just stick a brush into. It's up to you, whatever you can find. You might also hear it called frisking fluid. So masking fluid, frisking fluid. Next, I have Tombow pens. These are Tombow dual brushes, and the most important thing about the brush pens you choose is that they have to be water-based. So I've chosen 3 different colors of Tombow pens here. These are just kind of Valentine's-y colors. You can choose whatever colors you want. Just make sure that if they were to mix together, that they would make a nice color. You don't want like a gross brown or something like that. And of course, we're doing a Valentine's Day tutorial, so I chose Valentine's-y colors. So I have a red, a peach-ish color, and a really, really light pink. Try and choose 1 darker one and 2 sort of lighter ones, and you'll see why when we start working on this. But again, the most important thing is that it's water-based. Next, I have a water dropper. So this I squeeze into the water and I can take out some drops. If you don't have one of these, you can find them at the dollar store or at the art store, but you can also use a water brush pen. So if you have a water brush like this Pentel Aquash brush, you can just drip some water out of that too. That works fine. Or even if you don't have any of these things, you can use a paintbrush, just load it up with water and then get some water droplets off of it. So something that you can drip water from. And then obviously you're gonna need some water. Couple more things here. I have a Ziploc bag. Not even gonna explain why, you're gonna see why in a minute. I have watercolor paper. So this is what I'm gonna make my card out of. I'm actually just gonna make my own card from a piece of paper. But if you have a card lying around, just make sure that it's a nice thick paper, ideally watercolor paper, because we're gonna be putting water on it. And usually if you put water on a card, it'll warp. So heavy duty watercolor paper is best. This is cold press by Strathmore. Doesn't have to be this brand, just something thick that will absorb water a little bit better than your normal piece of paper. And I have painter's tape. So that's it for supplies. Now let's jump right in. All right, first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take 1 piece of this cold pressed paper out and just have it on my desk. You don't need to have the whole pad sitting there. And I'm gonna just sort of brainstorm what size I want my card to be. So ideally I want my card to be kind of like a normal size. So if I were to fold this in half, it's gonna be too big. So I'm gonna just imagine that it would be, I'm gonna cut the page a little bit like this, but I don't cut it ahead of time because in case my design ends up being a little bigger, I can cut the card after to the exact size of my design. Little hack there. So have your paper out, have a general idea of what size you wanna make your card. And then the first thing we're gonna do is take some of the painter's tape and you're gonna tape it off so that you're only working on what will be the front side of your card. So if we think about this, I'm gonna do my design in this bottom right corner so that when I fold my card over, that's the front. So for now, I want you to just tape off essentially the section of what will be the front of your card. So I'm gonna tape off about here on my paper, and it doesn't have to be exact because this is going to be like a really kind of rough abstract card. So tape that part of your paper, and I'm not taping it to the desk, I'm just taping it over the side of the paper. Okay, so this is going to be the front of my card, and I'll probably have it about here too, so I'll tape off that part too. Again, this doesn't have to be perfectly straight. It's just giving you an idea of what will be the front of your card. All right, and if you feel like you are a super messy person, you can also give yourself another layer. So the reason I'm doing this is so that I don't get any of my paint on the back of the card. So if you feel like you might make a bit of a mess, add a little extra layer there to block that part of the back of your card. So now we've got our front of the card all taped off and ready to go. The next thing I'm gonna do is use my masking fluid. So if you've never used masking fluid before, basically what this does is you put it on, and then once it dries, it's gonna keep the back, like the color of your paper, intact if you paint over top of it. So whatever you put masking fluid on, the color is not gonna soak through, and it's gonna leave the white color of your paper. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna write the words "I love you," or that's what I'm gonna write. You can write whatever you want. So basically the one that I'm using has this little pin. So if I squeeze out a little bit, the masking fluid will come out and I can write with it. Now, if you're using one that you have to dip into, just use a paintbrush and write it that way. But this is, I find, the easiest way. So I'm gonna write the words "I love you" really like kind of centered in this card. So when you're using this pin type masking fluid, you wanna just squeeze like a tiny, tiny little bit. It doesn't have to be very heavy. And if you're gonna do modern calligraphy like I am, you wanna be thickening those lines as you go. So this downstroke part of the eye is gonna be thicker than the rest. Now, I really didn't like the way that eye turned out. I feel like I squeezed the masking fluid a little too much. And the nice thing about masking fluid is it comes off. So just take a piece of paper towel and scrub it off the page. Easiest to do that if it's not dry yet. But it's also pretty easy if you did your whole design and decided you didn't like it, you can just wipe it all off. So I'm going to try that again. Gently, really, really gently with this masking fluid. But again, I'm going to thicken the downstrokes as I go. There we go. There's a better eye. Now I'm going to write "love." Thickening the downstroke. So I'm happy with the way that that looks, and now you basically are just going to let it dry. We can't do anything else on this card until that masking fluid is really, really dry. So walk away from it and then come back once it's fully dry to the touch. All right, my masking fluid is dry. Just a quick note here that even to the touch, it still feels a little bit sticky. By nature, it's going to be sticky because it's rubber. So don't worry about that. It usually is pretty dry, but the longer you can leave it, the better. If you're worried that it's still wet, then the rule should probably be to just leave it a little bit longer because it will ruin your project if it doesn't stick to your paper properly. Okay, the next thing you're going to do is grab your Ziploc bag and you're going to grab your 3 markers. So basically what we're doing is we're going to take some color from here and we're going to transfer it onto the card. So the way you lay out your color is essentially what you're going to put on your card. So basically what I like to do is just take the darker one and start a little blob in the middle here, and you don't have to color it in really intensely or anything. In fact, leaving some blank, and then take your lighter ones and add just some, some secondary spots. It doesn't matter if it overlaps with your darker color, and then same thing with your 3rd color. This one you can hardly see on the paper or on the Ziploc unless I touch it to the other colors, but again, it's fine to have some lighter and some darker spots. Okay, and then what you're gonna do, just to make sure, is put your design over top of your card and make sure that it's about the same size and that it's gonna cover properly. So this is essentially what we're gonna transfer on. Now I'm noticing that my color is already running off the edge here, so I'm gonna take a little bit of paper towel and wipe that off. It's better to have not enough color than too much color at this point, because I'll show you how you can add more later, but it's harder to take it away. Then I'm going to take my dropper. I'm going to fill it up with water. You don't need a ton of water, just a little bit. And then you're going to do some drops onto your design. Being careful not to make giant water drops or anything, just a couple here and there. You don't need a ton. Just making sure they're sort of evenly spaced throughout your design. Okay, so about that many. And then the moment of truth. Okay, so you're gonna take your design, flip it over, and you can even hold it up like this so that when you put it down, you know that it's lining up properly. So I'm gonna slowly put it down and then drop it onto my page and press. And not just press flat, but you want to sort of like rub around. You're essentially moving the water around on the design here. So really spreading it out. And then just carefully slide your fingers under the design, hold the Ziploc tight to the page, and flip it over. Okay, and you can see here that I sort of misplaced my paper, which is fine. But I want you to, while the Ziploc is still on here and it's still wet, I want you to squish around the design a little bit more. And you can see as you do that, that the color will smush around and fill in some of the gaps. Now with this one, like I said, I made a little bit of a mistake because I put my Ziploc, or I put my paper a little too far on the side of my Ziploc, so I've gone over the edges here, and I haven't put enough over the words I love you. So now what I'm gonna do is take my brush pen and fill in some of those spots with color. And then I'm gonna take a paintbrush, dip it in my water, and spread that around. So any of these, and the same thing goes with any of these spots that don't have enough water, you can even just take your brush and smudge around what's existing there. Just adding a little bit of water. So because these pens are water soluble, they'll smudge. So I really love the way that there's some blank spots and that this is uneven, but if you want it to be really filled up and even, you can add more color wherever you want it and squish it around. I find the blank spots look really pretty, so I wouldn't add too much, but at least making sure that where your design is, it'll be legible. So I'm adding a couple of the different colors here. This is my more orangey one. Add some water and squish it around. And then because I went over the edge on this side, I'm gonna wanna go over the edge on the other side too. So I'm gonna do this a little bit more, and I still have some color left on my Ziploc. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of water to that Ziploc again. And I'm gonna actually just carefully flip the Ziploc onto that spot and squish it around. And again, it didn't transfer super well, but you can smudge these dots. Add a little more color in some spots that you want it. This is just a really messy process, and you can make it as filled up or as basic as you want it. So just continue smudging until you're happy with the design. You could even fill up the entire card if you want to. Keep doing the Ziploc trick until you're really happy with it. But I think I'm pretty good with this amount of color on here. So now, another waiting game, you need to let that dry completely. All right, once it's dry, now it's time for the fun part where you actually get to remove the masking fluid. Now, if it's not totally dry, this probably won't work, or if your masking fluid wasn't totally dry. So basically you can do this with your finger, or you can do it with an eraser, or you can do it with an actual rubber removal tool that you can get at craft stores. I'm just gonna do it with my finger. So you're basically just gonna rub off the masking fluid and see how the dot on that eye is completely white because the masking fluid protected it from the paint. So this is super satisfying if it works properly. You can see that it worked really well on my letter I. So hopefully it worked on the rest of my word. And so far, so good. So just run your finger over the masking fluid and pull it all off. And there you go. It's super masked and all of the letters are white. So I love the way this turned out. I really like actually the pattern of this card. The only thing I'm noticing is that on this edge and this edge and this edge, it's running over the edges, but down here it's totally clean. So this is why I told you not to cut your card before designing it, because I can actually cut my card to be the exact size I want it, and it'll look like I did all of that on purpose. So I'm just gonna peel this tape off. All right, so yeah, I can see a really clean edge here, a really clean edge here, and then obviously on this side it's a clean edge. So now I want one at the bottom. So I'm just gonna grab my paper cutter. If you don't have one of these, you can obviously just use also a knife or scissors. But I'm gonna slide this in and line it up where I wanna cut. Not cutting off very much, just a little bit. And then cut my card. So now I've got the watercolor running over all of the edges, and I still have this side over here to cut my card to the size that I want it. So basically all I'm gonna do now is fold this over. And if you have a scoring tool, like if you can make your score line, you can do that as well. I'm just gonna do this really kind of old school. And I'm actually gonna use a ruler, folding my paper over it, cut off all the excess. And if you're really worried, like I am with this card, that my I love you is more to the left than to the right, you can even cut off a little bit more. And there you have it, a really, really easy Valentine's Day card with a super easy watercolor background. The one thing I will say here is if you're not happy with the way that this has turned out and you actually want to add some more color, you can easily do that. Just take your brush pens, fill some things in a little bit more. So for example, if I wanted the inside of this O to be a little darker, just fill it in and use a tiny bit of water to smudge it around. Once the masking fluid is off, you're just gonna have to be a little more careful with that, but it's totally doable. And the very last thing is if you don't have masking fluid, you can also just do this with the watercolor background and then use regular brush pens over top to write your words. It doesn't have to be white, you can do it in whatever color you want, so you don't need the masking fluid. I just really love this technique and the way that masking fluid turns out. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you make lots of fun Valentine's Day cards, or you can even just do this watercolor background with lots of different colors for totally different cards. It's super, super easy. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel because I put out 2 new videos like this every single week, and I hope to see you back here sometime soon.